I've never trusted people who call themselves cool or smart. Like, if you have to say it, then it probably isn't true. And I think the same could be said about bikes. So when Marin released a version of the Rift Zone and straight up called it the XR, which stands for Extra Rad, I was skeptical. I mean, sure, it's got more travel, bigger brakes, beefier tires, but is that really enough to justify the name? Well, that's what I've been trying to figure out over the last couple weeks. So in this video, we're gonna break down the frame, talk about what changes Marin's made to the components to justify the XR moniker, and then of course, get into how it actually feels to ride. Now, let's be real. The frame on the Rift Zone XR is far from flashy. There's no in-frame storage, no geometry adjusting flip chips, and no wild suspension linkages to geek out over. And you know what? I think I kind of like that. While a lot of brands are chasing complexity, trying to one-up each other, Marin has been happy to just keep it simple. And in my opinion, it's working well for them. In addition to having less to maintain or fiddle with, one of the big advantages of the stripped-down frame design is its weight. My size medium bike, set up tubeless and without pedals, came in at just over 32 pounds or 14.5 kilograms. That's pretty dang impressive for a metal frame with 2.5-inch Maxxis Assegais front and rear. And with some lighter wheels and tires, you could easily get this thing under 30 pounds. Keeping with the less is more idea, both this Rift Zone XR as well as the standard Rift Zone gets 130 millimeters of rear wheel travel delivered by a linkage-driven single pivot that Marin calls multi-track. Seeing as this is, after all, a trail bike, it's tuned to prioritize pedaling efficiency and mid-stroke support, but there's still enough progression at the end of the stroke to handle bigger hits. So while it might not have all the kinematic wizardry of a more complex design, it delivers consistent, predictable performance in a variety of terrain. In terms of geometry, you get a 65-degree head tube angle, 77-degree seat tube angle, 430mm chainstays, and pretty middle-of-the-road reach numbers across all four sizes. Again, nothing flashy here. Marin isn't trying to reinvent the wheel. Instead, you get a bike that's easy and intuitive to ride. To be honest, that in and of itself is kinda rad. But this isn't the Rift Zone kinda rad, it's supposed to be the Rift Zone extra rad. For that, we need to turn to the components. While the regular Rift Zone runs a 140mm fork, the XR bumps that up to 150mm RockShox Lyric Select Plus. Not only does this give you 10 more millimeters of squish, but also a stiffer chassis and a much better damper that has both low and high-speed compression adjustment. A byproduct of the longer fork is also a slightly slacker head tube angle, further increasing confidence on steeper sections of trail. Out back, you get the same 130mm of travel as on the not-so-rad Rifty, but it's now handled by a RockShox Super Deluxe Select Plus. This adds a piggyback reservoir, which helps manage heat on long descents and keeps damping consistent during repeated hits. The group set on the Marin is a full SRAM affair. You get a 12-speed GX drivetrain, which is more or less equivalent to the 12-speed Shimano setup on the standard Rift Zone. But the SRAM DB8 brakes are a huge upgrade. These powerful 4-piston stoppers are paired to massive 200mm rotors front and rear. These brakes are the kind of setup you'd expect to see on a full-fledged enduro bike, not a short-travel trail bike. They definitely hint at the intended use the Rift Zone XR is designed for. But those brakes hint at the fact that this bike may be more capable than the numbers suggest. The tire choice absolutely screams it. You get 2.5-inch Maxxis Assegais front and rear, which are widely regarded as some of the grippiest tires in the market. It's pretty unheard of to see tires like this spec'd on a trail bike, because not only are they heavy, but they also have pretty high rolling resistance, which means they're not super great for climbing. But if you're the type of rider who pushes traction limits, then these are the ones for you. Rounding out the rest of the part spec are Marin's in-house wheels and cockpit, as well as a Trans-X dropper post with up to 200mm of travel depending on frame size. So yeah, calling your own bike extra rad might be a little bit cheesy, but to Marin's credit, the components spec'd on the Rift Zone XR are definitely a bit more robust than what you typically find on a shorter travel trail bike. The 150mm fork, powerful brakes, and super burly tires all point to the fact that this thing was built with rowdier riding in mind. And you know where's a pretty rowdy place to take a 130mm trail bike? The bike park. And honestly, this thing held up way better than I expected. Unsurprisingly, it was an absolute hoot on the jump lines. Single pivot bikes are known for their playful poppy feel, and the Marin was no exception. Combine this with the short chainstays and 27.5-inch wheels I opted to use for this review, and it made for a bike that was incredibly easy to throw around. But what really surprised me was how well the Marin handled the rougher sections of trail. especially the loose, rocky tech trails at Mount Bachelor. If there is anywhere this bike was going to get in over its head, it was going to be here. But the suspension handled the rough stuff way better than I expected. The Lyric proved to be plenty stiff enough, and the multi-track layout in the rear had just enough progression to keep you from blowing through the travel too quickly. Honestly, if I didn't know what bike I was riding, I would have guessed it had at least 150 millimeters of travel. Now, of course, the Maxxis Acid guys get some credit here as well. They offered a ton of bite in loose corners and kept things planted through brake bumps and dusty rock gardens. Speaking of brake bumps, I definitely wasn't doing the park crew any favor as I was dragging my brakes through said techy sections of trail, but even still, the SRAM DB8s gave me plenty of stopping power and fade resistance run after run. All in all, I'd say the XR passed the bike park test with flying colors. Sure, it wasn't designed to ride the park, but it definitely didn't mind being there. Next up, it's time to talk about how the Riftzone handled more traditional trail rides. Climbing performance is surprisingly strong for how aggressive this bike looks on paper. I think a big part of this comes down to the relatively low weight. The GX drivetrain also helps here. It gives you that massive 10 to 52 tooth range, so you've always got a bailout gear when things get too steep. The suspension also provided a nice balance between grip and efficiency. It tracked well on more technical climbs, but never felt overly active when pedaling hard. If there's anything that's going to be holding this bike back on the climbs, it is the heavier tires and wheels. But if you prioritize a bike that climbs more efficiently, then even just swapping these tires out for something a little lighter and faster rolling would make a pretty big difference. But let's be real. If you've got your eye on the Riftzone XR, you're probably more interested in descending than climbing anyway. And thankfully, that's where the Riftzone really excels. The 65-degree head tube angle struck a nice balance between agility and confidence, keeping the front end composed when needed, but also making it sprightly and energetic on less aggressive terrain. Cornering is definitely one of my bigger weaknesses as a rider, but the short wheelbase and smaller 27.5-inch wheels help the bike dive into corners with ease. Once again, I'm going to brag about that multi-track suspension design, which impressed me just about everywhere I took the bike. On mellower blue trails, it did a great job ironing out smaller rocks and roots without ever feeling dull or muted. This gave you the freedom to either cruise through the main line or get creative, popping off side hits and pulling for doubles. And honestly, it's on these dark blue trails that I would say the Riftzone XR really shined the most. The sharper geometry and 130 millimeters of rear-wheel travel made sure that everything stayed nice and fun and never got dull or muted. But at the same time, the burlier component spec added confidence and capability for when you wanted to push just a little bit harder. If I could sum up the Riftzone XR in just one phrase, it would be as a trail bike that doesn't know its limits. It's surprisingly composed on rough technical terrain and manages big hits like a longer travel bike, but it's still just as playful and agile as you'd expect a 130mm single pivot bike to be. It thrives on blue trails, but point it down something a little gnarlier, like a Black Diamond tech trail at a bike park, and the Riftzone certainly isn't going to let you down. So yeah, I'd say that definitely fits the bill as being extra rad. Now, if you're looking for a bike that's just about as versatile but comes in at a significantly lower price point, you should check out the Polygon Siskiyou T7. It's less than $2,000, and for that, you still get mid-tier air suspension, a 12-speed Shimano drivetrain, and 4-piston brakes. Now, if you're looking for a bike at this price point that's even more capable, say you plan to spend most of your time in the bike park, but only occasionally go on trail rides, then you should check out the all-new Polygon Colossus N7. Its burly aluminum frame and 170 mils of travel front and rear are designed to be ridden hard and put away wet. I've left a link to all 3 of these bikes down there in the description. If you have any questions about the Riftzone, or really any other bikes we carry at Bikes Online, then you can leave that in the comments. Before you get out of here, I'd appreciate it if you take just a second to like this video and subscribe to the Bikes Online YouTube channel. And after you've done that, grab your bike, whatever it is, get out there, get ripping.